GCSE History, Elizabethan England. Elizabethan society and government. In this video, we are looking at the structure of society, the lives of the rich and poor, central and local government, and key individuals. The structure of society. In Elizabethan England, society was strictly organised in a hierarchical structure, meaning everyone had a defined place in the social order. People in this period believed that this structure was divinely ordained through what they called the Great Chain of Being, a system where everyone was placed by God in a set order. It was thought that changing one's place could disrupt society. This belief gave structure and stability to Elizabethan England. At the very top of the social hierarchy was the monarch, who held absolute authority over the country. Elizabeth I was seen as God's representative on earth, and people were expected to be loyal to her as their ruler. Below the monarch came the nobility, a small but powerful class who held large estates and often advised the Queen on matters of state. Nobles were wealthy and influential, holding significant control over land and resources. Next came the gentry, an increasingly important class during Elizabeth's reign. They were wealthy landowners, but did not hold noble titles. While they were not considered part of the nobility, they were still influential and owned considerable property, making them powerful in local politics. The gentry were often well educated, and many worked in local government, helping to manage the country. Then came the common people, who made up the majority of the population. They lived in both the countryside and towns, and their social status depended on either land ownership or their occupation. In the countryside, social class was largely based on land. Yeomen were farmers who owned their own land. They were generally self-sufficient and held a respected, stable position in rural society. Tenant farmers rented land from wealthier landowners, paying rent or a portion of their crops. They were lower in status than yeomen as they did not own the land they worked on. In towns and cities, hierarchy was shaped more by wealth and profession. The emerging middle class included merchants, lawyers, and professionals. Though not landowners, they were well educated and respected in society. Skilled craftsmen, such as carpenters, blacksmiths, and tailors, produced goods and provided services, playing a vital role in daily life and the urban economy. At the bottom of the social hierarchy were the poor and unemployed. Unskilled labourers worked long hours doing manual jobs for low wages, while the unemployed or paupers were also part of this group, often struggling to survive in a society that offered little assistance. This system of social classes in Elizabethan England shaped daily life, determining what jobs people could have, what responsibilities they held, and even what they were allowed to wear. Social mobility was rare, and most people remained in the social class they were born into. The rich. Life for the rich was one of luxury, wealth, and showing off their status. The rich were primarily made up of the nobility and the gentry, each with different levels of influence and responsibility. The nobility. The nobility were the most respected members of society, often holding titles like duke, earl, or baron. These titles were inherited and passed down through families, ensuring that power and land remained within noble families. Nobles owned large estates and had significant influence over the land and people within them. The gentry. Below the nobility, the gentry were wealthy landlords who made their living from rents paid by tenant farmers. Unlike the lower classes, the gentry did no manual labour. Many members of the gentry held important roles in society, such as justices of the peace or members of parliament, helping to govern the country. During Elizabeth's reign, this class grew as wealth increased, partly due to the land made available after Henry VIII dissolved the monasteries. For the wealthy, life centred on displaying their status through grand homes, lavish clothing, and extravagant lifestyles. Housing. Wealthy families lived in large, impressive houses. These houses often had multiple rooms and many glass windows, which were a luxury at the time. Interiors were lavishly decorated, and landscaped gardens were common, with grand pathways, fountains, and flower beds for beauty and relaxation. Food. The rich had abundant food, with meals almost entirely made up of meat, such as beef, pork, venison, and game birds. Meat was a sign of wealth, and elaborate banquets with multiple courses were common. Spices and imported foods, like sugar and fruits, were used to show off wealth and impress guests. Clothing. Clothing was a major way to display wealth, especially for those attending court who wanted to gain Elizabeth's attention. Clothing was heavily regulated, and certain materials and colours were restricted based on social rank. Nobles and royalty could wear luxurious fabrics like velvet and ermine fur, while lower nobles were allowed to wear fox and otter fur. Purple clothing was reserved for the Queen herself, and gold was only worn by royalty. A standout fashion item was the ruff, a starched, frilled collar worn around the neck, which was popular among men and women. The larger and more elaborate the ruff, the wealthier the person was perceived to be. The wealthy wore elaborate clothes with heavy decoration, embroidery, and jewels, but modesty was key. Clothing covered necks, wrists, and ankles, with layers of fabric to show both wealth and adherence to social norms. Leisure. The rich enjoyed plenty of leisure time. They often participated in sports like jousting, fencing, and hunting. Many also supported the arts, attending plays, listening to music, and commissioning portraits to display in their homes. Wealthy Elizabethans also designed grand gardens where they could host guests and display their wealth and taste for beauty. The poor. Life for the poor was difficult and often marked by hardship, disease, and limited opportunities. Poverty affected roughly 1/3 of the population, and the poor faced daily challenges just to survive. Housing. The poor lived in crowded and unsanitary conditions, whether in the countryside or towns. Homes were small, squalid, and usually filled with smoke from open fires used for cooking and warmth. Urban areas especially were dirty, with open sewage in the streets. In rural areas, homes were often built with simple materials like wood and mud, making them uncomfortable and lacking basic furniture. Food. For the poor, food was basic and limited. Their diet centred on bread, usually dense, dark rye or barley bread, and pottage, a thick vegetable stew often made with beans, peas, and grains. Meat was rare, usually only eaten on special occasions, while vegetables like onions, leeks, and cabbage were staples. When available, they might have a small amount of bacon, fish, or dairy, but these were occasional luxuries. Ale was the main drink for the poor, as clean water was scarce. Due to frequent food shortages and poor harvests, hunger and malnutrition were common issues. Clothing. The clothes worn by the poor were simple and practical. Since clothing was expensive, they often had just 1 or 2 outfits made of rough materials like wool or linen. The government enforced sumptuary laws starting in 1574, which restricted the poor from wearing certain colours or fabrics that were reserved for higher classes. This meant that only the wealthy could wear fine materials and bright colours, while the poor dressed in simple, functional clothing without adornment. Health. Poor living conditions meant that the spread of diseases was common, especially in cities where most people lived close together and sanitation was almost non-existent. Open sewage and unclean water sources led to illness, and few people had access to doctors or medicine. Diseases could spread quickly, and without a good diet, the poor had weakened immune systems, making them even more vulnerable. Central government. The monarch. The monarch was the central figure in government, believed to rule by the grace of God. Elizabeth made all major decisions, with advice from her Privy Council, but held the final say. She alone could declare war, make peace, call or dismiss Parliament, and grant titles, land, money, and jobs to maintain loyalty. This gave her vast control over the kingdom's politics, military, and society. The Royal Court. The Royal Court was a mobile centre of government and social activity, following the Queen wherever she went. It included around 1,000 people, from nobles and advisors to servants. The court served as a hub for political decisions and grand social events, impressing foreign ambassadors with cultural displays to showcase England's power. Strict rules governed court life, reinforcing loyalty and enhancing the Queen's mystique. The Privy Council. The Privy Council was a small, powerful group of advisors who helped Elizabeth make key decisions for the country. Shortly after her coronation, Elizabeth appointed 19 members to her first Privy Council, making it half the size of the one her sister, Mary, had kept. Elizabeth carefully chose half the council members from Mary's Catholic-influenced council to avoid upsetting important members and to benefit from their experience. The other half were new members chosen by Elizabeth for their loyalty, skills, and political abilities. The Privy Council met regularly to discuss important issues affecting England. They advised the Queen on matters like foreign policy, domestic issues, dealing with threats and challenges, decisions about war, and relations with other countries. While Elizabeth did not attend every meeting, she had notes taken so she could stay informed about their discussions and decisions. Although the council gave advice and helped carry out political actions, the final decision on every issue rested with the Queen. Elizabeth's Privy Council was highly efficient and made up of professional politicians and educated men, making it a reliable and effective group for managing the country's affairs. To stay in touch with the country, the Privy Council worked closely with local town and city leaders, who helped communicate the council's decisions and policies to people across England. This network allowed the Privy Council to stay informed about what was happening throughout the country and ensure that Elizabeth's rule was enforced. Parliament. Parliament played an increasingly important role in government in Tudor England, especially after Henry VIII's use of it to separate England from the Catholic Church in the 1530s. While Parliament's influence grew, it couldn't govern independently because the monarch still held ultimate authority. Parliament's main purpose was to assist the Queen, especially by approving taxes, which the monarchy relied on to fund government and military expenses. Elizabeth called Parliament only when necessary, and there were only 13 sessions held during her 45-year reign, each lasting around 3 weeks. These sessions focused primarily on raising funds or advising the Queen on specific issues. There were specific areas, known as the royal prerogative, where Parliament had no power, including decisions on foreign policy, the Queen's marriage, and the line of succession. In these matters, Elizabeth's word was final. Parliament could propose laws on other issues, but Elizabeth had the authority to veto any Act of Parliament. Parliament was divided into 2 houses. The House of Lords. This was the more powerful of the two, made up of about 90 members of the nobility and bishops at the start of Elizabeth's reign. By the end, there were only 55. The House of Lords had significant influence due to its members' wealth, titles, and status. The House of Commons. This had 450 elected MPs, or Members of Parliament, who were primarily well-educated gentry, wealthy merchants, and skilled lawyers. Each county sent 2 knights, and each borough sent 2 burgesses to represent it. the House of Commons had less power than the House of Lords, but it represented a broader range of society. Voting was limited to wealthy landowners and nobility, so only a small, powerful section of society had a say in Parliament. While there were groups and factions within Parliament, there were no political parties as we know them today, so MPs often formed alliances based on specific interests or regional ties. Patronage. Patronage was a powerful system used by Elizabeth to control her court and ensure loyalty among the nobles. Unlike male monarchs who held private meetings with favoured courtiers in their private apartments, Elizabeth, a female monarch, could not have men stationed in her private rooms. Instead, she used patronage to grant political positions and responsibilities to her favoured courtiers. These positions often came with wealth, prestige, and influence, making them highly desirable. Through patronage, Elizabeth could reward loyalty and hard work, while ensuring those closest to her were entirely devoted to her rule. However, patronage worked both ways. If a courtier fell out of favour, Elizabeth could quickly strip them of their privileges, which kept her courtiers eager to maintain her favour. Progresses. Elizabeth went on royal progresses each summer, travelling through parts of the country to stay in various noble households. Unlike other monarchs who built their own palaces, Elizabeth managed a struggling economy by residing in her inherited royal residences and relying on noble hosts during her travels. These progresses mostly took her through the South East, the Midlands, and East Anglia. Royal progresses allowed Elizabeth to stay visible to her subjects, strengthening her image as a caring and approachable ruler. Seeing the Queen in person was rare, and her visits inspired loyalty and admiration among her people. For nobles, hosting the Queen was seen as an incredible honour, as it marked them as favoured and brought them prestige. Hosting the Queen was a mixed blessing. Whilst it was an honour, the costs were overwhelming. Nobles often went to extreme lengths to impress Elizabeth, building extensions, redecorating rooms, and organising grand feasts and entertainment. Keeping the Queen and her court entertained could take weeks, and the expense sometimes pushed noble families into debt or even bankruptcy. Local government. Lords Lieutenant. Lords Lieutenant played an important role in maintaining the Queen's authority and managing local defence. Each county in England had one Lord Lieutenant, hand-picked by the monarch. These officials were usually members of the nobility and often served on the Privy Council, giving them high status and authority. As representatives of the monarch, Lords Lieutenant were responsible for enforcing the Queen's rules and decisions within their county. They ensured that the local government respected Elizabeth's authority, helping to keep control and loyalty to the Crown. Lords Lieutenant were also in charge of local defences. This included organising the county's militia, a group of ordinary men trained to fight in case of an invasion or other threat. Lords Lieutenant would raise the militia, provide them with weapons and training, and make sure they were prepared if needed. Justices of the Peace. Justices of the Peace were large landowners who played a key role in keeping law and order within their local communities. Serving as a JP was considered a position of high status, but it was unpaid, so only wealthier individuals could take on this responsibility. JPs were responsible for enforcing laws in their area, handling minor crimes, and settling local disputes. They organised court sessions where they dealt with issues like public disorder, property disputes, and minor offences. This helped keep peace and order in their communities. JPs reported directly to the Privy Council, the Queen's main advisory group. This allowed the Privy Council to stay informed about local issues and helped ensure that the Queen's laws were followed throughout England. Key individuals. William Cecil, Lord Burleigh. William Cecil, later known as Lord Burleigh, was Elizabeth's Secretary of State and one of her most trusted and influential advisers. As the most important member of the Privy Council, Cecil played a central role in Elizabeth's government from the beginning of her reign, guiding her policies and helping shape her rule. He held the position of Secretary of State until 1573, when he was promoted to Lord Burleigh. Even after his promotion, Cecil continued to serve as a key advisor, known for his cautious and strategic approach to politics. He was essential in managing both domestic affairs and foreign policy, ensuring stability during a turbulent period in English history. Sir Francis Walsingham. Sir Francis Walsingham served as Elizabeth's Secretary of State from 1573 to 1590 and was famously known as her spy master. A highly trusted advisor, Walsingham was responsible for England's security, taking the lead in handling threats from foreign rivals like Spain and Catholic allies across Europe. He established a sophisticated network of spies, using it to uncover numerous plots against Elizabeth, including the famous Babington plot that led to Mary Queen of Scots' execution. Walsingham's intelligence work was crucial in protecting the Queen and securing England against both internal and external threats. Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester, was a close and trusted advisor to Elizabeth and one of her longest-standing friends. Known for his loyalty, Dudley had a unique position within the court, and there were persistent rumours of a romantic connection between him and the Queen. Although he never held a formal government position like Cecil or Walsingham, Dudley was an influential figure and one of Elizabeth's key confidants. He played a role in various military campaigns, including supporting the Protestant cause in the Netherlands against Spain. Dudley remained an essential part of Elizabeth's inner circle until his death in 1588. In summary, Elizabethan society was strictly hierarchical, with everyone believed to have their place in the great chain of being, a system seen as divinely ordered to maintain social stability. The social structure was topped by the monarch, followed by the nobility, gentry, and common people, whose status was based on land ownership or occupation in both rural and urban areas. The rich, including nobles and the gentry, displayed their status through large houses, fine clothing, and lavish lifestyles, while the poor lived in basic homes, faced hunger, and had little access to healthcare. Elizabeth ruled as monarch with absolute authority, advised by her Privy Council and supported by her royal court, using systems like patronage and royal progresses to maintain loyalty. Parliament existed mainly to approve taxes and advise the Queen, but Elizabeth controlled its power through her royal prerogative, calling it only 13 times in her 45-year reign. Government officials, such as Lords Lieutenant and Justices of the Peace, helped enforce royal authority locally, keeping order, managing defences, and reporting to the Privy Council.